So let's talk about true world history. Just a quick recap, just this title screen here, Garden of Eden. This is the sons of God, looking at the children of men, daughters of men. And this, of course, is the Tower of Babel. These will have significance as we go along, so just kind of get a mental picture of those things. All right, so highly recommend this series of talks. There's 4 talks. I think they're about an hour and a half each by a gentleman named Michael Heiser. It's called Michael Heiser's Supernatural Seminar. These slides and video, I'm hoping, should be available on our webpage, www.godstruegems.ca afterwards. So you can look up these links later. But Michael Heiser speaks about the 3 falls. And if you really want to understand true world history, so evolution, of course, is the fake. It's the thing that's kind of put out there for us to believe, and it kind of gives them an alternative for people to think of instead of looking into true world history, how this world really developed, how God's plan for the earth, what the enemy's been doing to kind of disrupt that plan. Michael Heiser really gets into that. So I strongly recommend this. I've recommended it to a lot of people now, and a lot of people come back and just say, wow, you know, this is something that really opened my eyes to understand things. One of the real critical passages here is Genesis 6:4. And if you can understand this and not have it explained off by someone from seminary saying, oh, those sons of God, they just meant sons of Cain. Don't worry, they're just natural human material entities. They're not supernatural in any way. And again, that's seminary teaching. That's something that's taught to people. It's not true. The truth is these sons of God are supernatural. And I'll point that out later. They basically are fallen angels. I'll get into that more detail, but I just really want to kind of stress this verse in Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which are of old, men of renown. I talked about Mystery Babylon, how Mystery Babylon was a combination of supernatural, demonic, kind of fused with human. So basically, this is part of it, you know, Satan, the fall there, this thing here, the 70 sons of God, we'll talk about at the Tower of Babel. All of these things have been brought into this Mystery Babylon, this mystery religion, and they're corrupting these elite men. And these elite men, in turn, are deceiving the nations of the earth. And when you start seeing this battle that's going on, it'll help you understand that, hey, we got to be on God's side. We don't want to be on these men who are deceiving us. We got to get back to God. And this little section here with the Nephilim is going to really stress that and make sense of that. All right, so let's talk about these 3 falls and rebellions. So the first one happens in Genesis 3, which we're talking right about at the beginning. And this is where Satan deceives Adam and Eve in the garden. And this is the supernatural rebellion here. So there's going to be 3 of these falls and rebellions. And the result of this rebellion was death. So God wanted them to have eternal life. He wanted them to not have to go through this. But he says to them, if you eat of the tree, you shall surely die. And it means we have to go through a physical death at some point. And God's plan to kind of fix what Satan did was he promised them the Messiah. He promised them the 2 seeds. I remember I was looking for this passage, and we'll get to it in a second about the seeds. So just remember that, this is God's plan, is he promised them Messiah. Actually, I'll go to that right now. In Genesis 3, it says, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. He shall crush thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So again, this is speaking of the 2 seeds. So after Satan did this, God pronounced the plan, which would be that Satan would have his seed, Eve would have her seed, which is eventually Christ, and those are the 2 seeds. And again, we talk about the 2 trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The 2 seeds, the 2 trees, the 2 different ways of living. That's what that's all about. And then we go to the next fall. So this is, most people, when you talk to most regular Christians who go to church, they talk about this fall. They're familiar with this fall in Genesis 3, but not as many are familiar with this fall of Genesis 6, which is also talked about in the Book of Enoch, and we'll talk about that more later on. But these fallen angels come down to earth, rebel against God, basically. They weren't supposed to do that. And they mate with human women, creating these offspring, these Nephilim, these giants. And all this was about corruption. That was the result. Men were corrupted. These fallen angels and Nephilim would give secrets, heavenly secrets that men weren't supposed to know, and they taught men. They taught men all sorts of things: embroidery, the way of death, all these different things, weapons for war. These angels were the ones that were responsible for corrupting mankind. God's plan in this was the flood, and we'll get to the reason why God sent the flood. People think that's evil, but I'll just kind of put in your heads that it wasn't evil from God. He was actually doing a cleansing. And finally, the third rebellion that a lot of people don't know about is in Genesis 10. It's also referenced in Deuteronomy 32 and Psalm 82. I'll get into the details more of that, but basically in this rebellion, 70 sons of God were appointed to lead the different nations after the Tower of Babel. So when God split up the languages, he actually set up a son of God or a spiritual leader kind of over each of these nations. And as they kind of went their all separate ways, they each had their own separate gods. And that was these 70 sons of God. And God allowed them to say, hey, you guys think you can do it properly? You guys do your thing. But what that led to was into idolatry. And that was the result of that. And the end result of God's plan was actually to send Jesus to be lifted. If I be lifted up, I will draw all men to me. So he had these other 70 sons of God that were not begotten. Jesus is the only begotten son of God. But you'll see as we explain later that these different supernatural beings could not compare to Jesus. And what God does is he has everyone come back to Jesus. So we talked about this already. In Genesis 6, we talked about that verse. And so again, these sons of God are spiritual beings or fallen angels. The fallen angels, they actually reference this in Jude 1:6. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains in her darkness unto the judgment of the great day. So these angels left heaven. That was their own habitation. And now they're residing under the earth. And when you read the Book of Enoch, you'll see their fate as they sit in Tartarus, where they're punished in the deepest part of hell till the end of time. So speaking of the Book of Enoch, this was a book that was rediscovered in the 18th century, and it was actually being used as canon by Ethiopian Hebrews. So Ethiopian Hebrews would actually have this as part of their Bible. We have 66 books. I think they have like 80, I believe, including the Book of Enoch, including a lot of what in the West they refer to as the Apocrypha, but all that is accepted as canon by the Ethiopian Hebrews. The Book of Enoch is actually referenced in Jude and also in Peter. This is that reference where God will come with his thousands of saints in Jude. And that's actually in the Book of Enoch as well. And the Book of Enoch, when you read the whole thing, it covers fallen angels, Nephilim, demons, and the true purposes of the flood. The Book of Enoch was actually in wide circulation in Jesus' time. A lot of the people knew about the book, but essentially all copies of it were sort of hidden or taken away or burned or destroyed. You hear about this fire at the Alexandria. A lot of this old literature was destroyed at that time. And these were all hidden for a purpose. Mystery Babylon has kind of done this for a purpose because they don't want people to understand the true nature of our history. I just want to read a bit to this is the first words of the Book of Enoch. The words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are to be removed. I'm just going to fast forward here. The Holy One in the heavens, the angel showed me, and from them I heard everything, and from them I understood as I saw, but not for this generation, but for a remote one which is for to come. And so we're the generation that he's actually referring to, living in the day of tribulation and also remote generation. And so the Book of Enoch is actually for us. And so I highly encourage everyone to read it. You might hear some pastors kind of scare you away from it. Don't listen to them. Read it for yourself, discern for yourself, ask the Holy Spirit. But you'll find that this is something you should know, and it should reveal to you the actual truth of world history, not this evolution nonsense. So this is from chapter 10 of the Book of Enoch, verses 10 to 12. I'll just read it out. Restore the earth, which the angels have corrupted, and announce life to it, that I may revive it. All the sons of men shall not perish in consequence of every secret, by which the watchers have destroyed, and which they have taught their offspring. All the earth has been corrupted by the effects of the teaching of Azazel. Azazel is one of the fallen angels. To him, therefore, ascribe the whole crime. When you actually go to the Day of Atonement, they actually talk about two goats. And one goat is sent out to the wilderness and has all sin cast upon it. And they actually call that goat Azazel. Now, you'll see in most interpretations, they'll call it the scapegoat. but in some you'll actually see the word Azazel. And so the angels are what corrupted mankind. God isn't mad at mankind. God is actually upset with these angels, these fallen angels, for what they did. And when you read the Book of Enoch properly, you'll see that that's who the sin is going to be ascribed to, as these angels. That's why a lot of them are down in the deepest parts of hell, Tartarus, being held in chains, because they're punished for what they did. They corrupted mankind. God is making a way to restore it. So again, this is just a way to understand God, that he is love. He loves us. He loves human beings. It's these fallen angels that are at fault for corrupting us. So let's talk about the Nephilim. So people often get fallen angels and Nephilim confused. Fallen angels are the angels that left their own estate. Nephilim actually can be interpreted either as giants or earthborn, and these are the offspring of the fallen angels with human women. So these 200 fallen angels rebelled and had these giant offspring called Nephilim, and these giants have actually been discovered throughout the earth. They're mostly hidden from the public, and like Bernie said, it's the Smithsonian that's hiding them. What used to happen is, back in North America 200 years ago, they'd make one of these interesting findings, by one of the native burial mounds or something like that. They'd kind of let the newspapers know. They'd call in the Smithsonian. Smithsonian would come by, cart off the fossils or the skeletons, the remains, and then you'd never hear from it again. There's actually a little message. Hollywood is full of messages. And in the last scene of the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, the very last scene, they actually show this huge warehouse where the Ark of the Covenant in the movie, again, it's the movie version of it, but it gets taken away to this huge warehouse where it's never heard from again. And that's basically the Smithsonian. That's what they do. They take these things away that you never hear from them ever again or see them again. But these are actual pictures. They were photos in existence. And so you can see the size of that skull. You can see this guy standing over this finding here in the ground. They actually have documented, these are documented skeletal figures. And you see they range all the way from 15 feet. Goliath was felt to be about 9 feet. The largest one they have on record is 36 feet. You'll never hear about these because they can't sell their lie of evolution. If you've known that there's giants on the earth, how do you explain that in the evolution worldview? You can't, so they just hide it. These are some old newspaper clippings from back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Skeletons found in Sycamore Creek. This one is actually from, I think, India, Calcutta, yeah. And they found a 31-foot skeleton. They thought it was an animal, but it was actually in the shape of a giant man. They couldn't say it was a giant man because there was cognitive dissonance there where they couldn't believe a man could be that big, so they called it an animal, but it was actually a very large skeleton. You see here skeletons found 8 feet long in Ontario in a Redskins burial ground. The funny thing about these burial grounds are actually there's some laws passed where you can't actually go visit them. You're not allowed to disrupt them. And again, they just want to sort of not let people find these things. There's public national parks and things like that. And there's common trails that you're allowed access to. But there's actually a lot of these backdoor trails, all of these things that are not exposed to public view and you're not allowed access to. And that's kind of where a lot of these things actually still exist. Here's another finding here, 11-foot, 3-inch skeletons found, 2 of them together. And this was in 1798 in Pennsylvania. So there's tons of these. I just picked a handful that kind of represented, but there's tons of these newspaper clippings. This is, I think they call this the Irish giant. He's not that tall. I think he's like 8'6" or something like that. It's not major, but it is still pretty significant. I think this is what you were referring to, Bernie, where they found these big, large femurs. And you can see how big they are in comparison to a normal human-sized male. So this thing must have been huge. One of the interesting things about Nephilim is one of the First Nation things they do is the waving for hello actually originated from them. And the reason that came about was when you're looking at a silhouette from a distance, you can't really tell how tall it is. But the thing about these Nephilim is they actually had 6 fingers. And so when they put their hands in the air like waving, they're actually just showing how many fingers they had. These Nephilim were actually quite common to North America. So here's just a short clip. I think it's about 2 minutes, just of photos of this gentleman here who created it, of remnants of the Nephilim. So when God sent the flood, he destroyed the Nephilim, but these Nephilim were actually present even after the flood. And we know this because David slew a giant. Goliath actually had 4 brothers. So these giants were still in existence, but they were not the height that they were pre-flood. So pre-flood, they get up to 36 feet or higher. After the flood, maybe 9 to 12 feet tops. So I'll just play this out here. So those are all actual photos. They're not doctored. These are all legitimate old photos. And you'll see these guys are huge. And, again, you talk to some of the scientists and they'll say, oh, these are just cases of gigantism. Again, they're trying to, just have some sort of explanation for it. But these things are not normal. They're quite large. And so, again, there may be some remnant DNA kind of within these people. Now, there was actually a recent encounter with the Nephilim, and there's a very credible story about the US military encountering a Nephilim in 2002. They were kind of in a remote area of Afghanistan, and they were just on patrol, and suddenly a large, giant, thick figure, just like those pictures you saw. This one was believed to be about 13 feet tall, but actually he just came out of nowhere. He killed one of the US soldiers immediately, and then there was a firefight between them. And the soldiers, even though they were shooting directly at this giant, it would not go down. Just the body mass was so thick that the bullets really weren't having that major of an effect on it. They eventually did take it down. They actually transported it by plane. Who knows what happened to it? Probably maybe the Smithsonian took it away. But this thing was found in one of the remote areas of Afghanistan. There is a belief that these things do exist. There are deep tunnels under the earth that these things reside in. And, there probably are some of them kind of scattered throughout the earth. There's a good video by L.A. Marzulli where he goes into this in detail. He gets eyewitness account. It's actually quite credible. Some people might be quick to dismiss it, but when you see these soldiers, they look very sincere in what they're saying. So just going back to the Book of Enoch, so God sent the flood to destroy the Nephilim who were corrupting the earth. So those giants, they were actually cannibalizing, they were bullying, they were just taking whatever they wanted. Again, it's this corruption, right? And in the Bible, where they describe Noah as perfect, there's a saying that Noah was perfect. It doesn't mean that he was perfect like in deed. What it means, it was perfect in his genealogy. He was perfectly human. And when you go through Noah's descendants, they're all human, right? So there's no Nephilim corruption, and that's why Noah was considered perfect. Now, one interesting thing about the Nephilim is because the Nephilim giants were earthborn, they didn't come from heaven. They were actually created on the earth in rebellion to God. They weren't God's original part of the plan. But these things, when they're created on earth, because they're earthly, they're not able to go to heaven. Their spirit doesn't return to heaven. Their soul doesn't go to heaven. They actually remain trapped on the earth as spirits without bodies. Essentially what we know today as demons. And so these spirits without bodies, they actually start to influence people. They start corrupting people. They can possess people potentially if people get deep enough into sin. And there's this sort of continuum of sin we've talked about in our Bible study, but that's where these things come from. And this is kind of why our battle in this life is not against, it's not carnal, but it's spiritual. We don't battle against the flesh, but against powers and principalities, spiritual things. So when you start understanding where these demons come from, it actually makes a lot of sense why we would have authority over them, why we'd be able to cast them out of people, why it's so important that people not weaken their spiritual immune system, I call it, where they open themselves up to these demons. One of the things that we've talked about in our Bible study is how the vaccines kind of corrupt the soul in a sense and kind of make it more susceptible to demons. Drugs make people susceptible to demons. You know, kids, when they have their first outbreak of schizophrenia, it's usually after they started experimenting with drugs. So just to clear up here, God wasn't evil for sending the flood. He was actually cleansing the earth of evil. He was actually removing the Nephilim. Things got so bad on the earth that the entire earth was corrupted, except for Noah and his family. Noah and his 3 sons, they were perfectly human. And that's why God calls them perfect. They were not contaminated with this Nephilim DNA as of yet. One of the thought processes why there were giants afterwards is that the 3 sons actually married 3 other women that were not from Noah's line. And so their belief is that some of the contaminated DNA came in through them. And that's why they're still giants even after the flood. But what Satan was trying to do was he was trying to corrupt the human DNA so that Jesus would never be born. And so God had to stop that, because if God didn't, eventually all DNA on the earth would be contaminated. So God took the only DNA that wasn't contaminated, preserved it through the ark, and kept it so that the seed, the promised seed that would be eventually born to Eve and eventually to Abraham would eventually come, and that was Jesus. So now let's get to Genesis 10, and this is the 3rd rebellion. So I'll just read this. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who began to be a mighty one on the earth. So this is all after the flood now. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. So it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. His kingdom began in Babylon, in the land of Shinar. And that's in Genesis 10, 8-10. So just a few things about Nimrod is that here's Nimrod, and you can see that he was a giant. That's a lion that he's holding, and lions are huge. And so if that's the size of Nimrod, again, he's huge. He's a giant. Here it is again, Nimrod. This one here, Nimrod, he's sitting on his throne, and there's these normal-sized men approaching him. And again, you can see the difference in scale there, how large Nimrod is in relation to these men. So Nimrod was a giant, and that's why they called him a mighty hunter. Oftentimes when you see the word mighty men in the Old Testament, a lot of times that, and maybe all the time, I'm not sure, but a lot of times it will refer to giants, basically. Note that his kingdom began in Babylon. And when we talk about Mystery Babylon, again, there's that confluence of demons, spiritual power, humans that are willing to obey that power. I just want to sort of cement that in your mind, that these different transgressions, these different falls, these different rebellions are all about the spiritual mixing with elite men, kings of the earth. As you know, Babylon is one of those kingdoms that's referenced. And again, that's where the Mystery Babylon sits, on those different kingdoms that have ruled the earth throughout time. So just keep that in mind about Mystery Babylon. You really got to know who Mystery Babylon is. This is from the Book of Deuteronomy. Now, this is the Dead Sea Scrolls version. So the Deuteronomy 32 has actually been corrupted, the one that you find in the King James Version. The very last word there says, according to the number of the children of Israel, is what the KJV says. But when you go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are actually better preservations of the original Old Testament, it actually says God there. So the children of God, or the sons of God. I want you to keep that in mind, because these 70 sons of God are spiritual beings, and that's who's getting authority. So let me just read this here. Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father and he will show you, your elders and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the children of men, he set the bounds of the peoples according to the number of the children of God, which is 70. So what God did at the Tower of Babel, they were constructing a tower. They were actually having the original old world order, the whole, one world religion, one world government. They were trying to do that at that time. And what God did is as they were building the tower, he confused the languages into 70 different languages. And if you do any study of linguistics, you'll actually see there's 70 root vocabularies on the earth, 70 root languages. And so what God did was he had each of these 70 groups that he split up, and he had them go into different directions throughout the earth. And if you look at something called the Table of Nations, they actually show you how the 3 sons of Noah and all their descendants separate into these 70 different directions. With their 70 different languages, there's 70 different cultures, there's 70 different gods that they worship, these sons of God that they worship. And these gods exist today, are referred to as Baal, Dagon, Moloch, Ashtoreth. There's actually tons of them. And so all these different gods, these different local deities, so to speak, these were these different 70 sons of God. Now, when we go to Psalm 82, Psalm 82 is a difficult chapter for a lot of people to understand, because in it, I'll just read it. God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. He judgeth among the gods. Okay, that's gods. It's lowercase, so it's not the God, but it's other gods. And that word actually means spiritual beings. So God is the God of gods. He's the Elohim of the Elohim. But the Elohim in general refers to gods. And so these other heavenly beings, this council, so to speak, and when you listen to that Michael Heiser video, he'll go into it a lot more detail than I am. But all these other 70 gods were appointed different nations to rule over, and they traveled throughout the earth. And this is kind of where the world became astray, because all of them would follow their own way. And this is why Jesus's blood is so important, because let me read this first before I get ahead of myself. God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. He judgeth among the gods. How long will ye judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? Salah. Defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Rid them out of the hand of the wicked. So here God is berating them. He's saying, why are you, not being good leaders? Why are you doing things wrong? Why are you accepting the unjust? Why are you not treating the people that have been harmed, helping them? Why aren't you helping them out? And so these 70 different sons of God were doing things all their wrong way. They're kind of going about it their own way. Verse 5. They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course. I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, but ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. So what he's saying there is that he's berating them for doing the wrong thing. He's saying that you are gods, you're children of the Most High. You should be better than this. You are sons of God. But because of what you're doing, you're going to die like men. You're going to fall like one of the princes. Princes is one of these things where they talk about princes and, like the Prince of Persia or the Prince of Grecia. These are spiritual, right? And then at the very last verse there is very important. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for thou shalt inherit all nations. And so basically we know Jesus as the incarnation of God. He's God in the flesh. And so when we talk about the blood of Jesus, it's basically unique in all of existence. It's basically the representation of God on earth is this blood. And in our Bible study, we talk about the true name of God and the true name of Jesus. So Yahuwah, I am that I am, Yahusha, I am saves. It tells you who Jesus is. It's basically God come to save his people. And this is why his blood is so important when you actually understand what Jesus' true name is. It's not Jesus. In Greek and Hebrew, it wasn't Jesus. It was Yahusha. And when you understand that, it means I am saves. Hasha is salvation. And that's so critical because that's why the blood of Jesus is so important, only Jesus. So what Jesus does is he says, I will be lifted up and draw all men back to me. So what God does is Jesus comes down and he draws all men back to God. So these other sons of God that are misleading the people, doing it all wrong, Jesus was the obedient one, the one who would follow everything God said to a T, the one who would do it right, the one who would not judge unjustly, the one who would help the fatherless, help the poor. That's what Jesus did. He did all the right things. And so again, this is why Jesus is so important in our history, because he is God in the flesh, and it's only his blood that is able to save. Just getting back to Mystery Babylon here. So I mentioned this earlier, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, Ephesians 6:12. And so Babylon, otherwise this secret mystery religion, channel the spiritual powers, channel these demons, channel these things, and receive instruction and knowledge from them. When you actually start looking into what they do at these Bilderberg meetings and at these other secret things, they actually have channelers there. They channel these spirits and they receive instruction from them. And that's what Mystery Babylon is again, it's a combination of human beings that have surrendered to these evil spirits in combination with these demons working in rebellion against God. Again, it's a different seed. They're a completely different type. These spiritual powers corrupt humans, and they're actually planning their fourth rebellion. So we talked earlier about the 3 different rebellions. So what you'll often hear Klaus Schwab say is he'll often use this thing saying the 4th industrial revolution. And often this type is code. They often speak in code, these high-level elites. And what it really is, you can sort of break that down to the 4th workers' revolt, so industrial revolution, let's call it the 4th workers' revolt. And then let's change that down further to the 4th human rebellion. So they actually want human beings to rebel against God. They want us to kind of partake in this Mystery Babylon, surrender to it. You know, this is kind of what the digital ID is about. Is just becoming part of this Mystery Babylon. And as saints, as martyrs, you know, we're supposed to not be of this ilk. We're not supposed to be this type. We're not supposed to follow this type of way of doing things. And so that's why this understanding who Mystery Babylon is and what they're doing on the earth, where they've been in banking and politics, they're in science, unfortunately they're in education, they're in religion actually too. Like I said, a lot of these high-level churches have been infiltrated with these guys. If you ever really want to look into this, there's a guy named, what's his name? Rivera, Alberto Rivera. He was a high-ranking Jesuit priest. And if you just Google, you can actually find some work from Jack Chick. He had all these different, they call them comics or whatever you want to call them, but they're these tracts, actually. See, this is what I'm looking for. And he had all these tracts that kind of show what they're trying to do. But anyways, when you study, he talks about the infiltration of the church. Now, 4 in the Bible represents completeness in the whole world. And the spiritual's enemy plan, as was with the previous 3 rebellions, is to corrupt or kill as much of humankind as possible. And that's what they're doing. These vaccines, they're corrupting a lot of people. They're killing a lot of people. But, the question a lot of people ask is, hey, why? Why are they doing this? Jesus already won the battle at the cross. Why don't they just give up? Why don't they quit? And this is the reason. So this is from Luke 21:24. And they, believers, shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So what's happening is there's a set number of people among the Gentiles and nations to eventually be saved before Jesus returns to establish his kingdom. We talked about how, they describe, I can't remember, it's Revelation 6, I think it is, where they talk about the 144,000. And then afterwards, they talk about the innumerable multitudes, right? And those innumerable multitudes are the ones that are all going to be eventually saved before Jesus returns. And when that last person who, before the creation of the earth was determined to be saved, just before the end of the time of the Gentiles and when that person's be saved, that's when Jesus is going to be returned. But Satan's mindset is that if I can prevent that last person from ever being saved, from ever hearing the good news, from ever coming to Jesus, I can stay on this earth indefinitely. I can run out the clock, so to speak. If he can corrupt mankind enough that last person to be saved never gets saved, he gets to rule forever. Now, we all know that he's still going to lose, but in his mind, that's what he thinks. He thinks that if I can just corrupt all of mankind, I can keep the clock running and never run out of time and basically rule indefinitely. And that's what Mystery Babylon's goal is. So the enemy believes that by corrupting and destroying mankind, they can prevent the time of the Gentiles being fulfilled.